Unrealistic goals generate false hope. And false hope is a destructive thing. I think that's what's at the heart of our exceptionalism. What's at the heart of this notion that we are outside of nature is this false hope that we can survive when nature doesn't.
And it's to see, I mean, we were talking about this the other day, is that this idea of, human exceptionalism. Yeah, we're exceptional, we're extraordinary, but the thinking of ourselves as more extraordinary or more exceptional than the bacteria that allow us to survive, or the plankton or the trees. That's where we've gotten into trouble, which is where we don't honor the natural world as reality, integral to itself, and the limits that are placed there by God, reality, the universe, whatever, nature.
So we're really, as we're talking about young people, we're talking about a discouraging future. We're really kind of talking about this tension between truth and comfort. Isn't that really the fine line that we have to walk when we engage people in thinking about their lives and their future?
But there are some.
See, I don't do that. I don't do that. You two do that. I just urge them to plant trees.
And there are some people who find pleasure in knowing the truth about something. So it's not, they don't play off each other necessarily.
Yeah.
For example, for me, this summer has been painful.
Yeah.
But I also, you talk about deep satisfaction. There's a deep satisfaction that
obviously, no. I'm not suggesting that all truth is uncomfortable, or that all comfort is fantasy. I'm not saying that. But I am saying that there are moments when truth and comfort, we have to choose one over the other.
Right.
When my mother was on her deathbed, there were some, if she asked me a certain question that I didn't want her to know the truth about, I would falsify it for the sake of her comfort.
Of course.
So in some cases, you will choose comfort, in other cases truth. So it's a fine line.
Right.
And we're in a moment when the truth about the future is discomforting.
Right.
So we're in a moment when that tension is very real, and we have to be serious about how we think about what we tell young people. But we don't want them to jump off high buildings and...
Well, no, but what comes before that, and I think you have to have courage, is that worse than having a young person accept the truth and alter their life is having them or anyone else, an older person, come back at you with incredible anger because you are challenging the deepest worldview that they have, and that's the myth of human centrality, human exceptionalism, and what we've lived into and heard from our grandparents who came from dirt floor shacks in Hungary, in my part, in Norway, or right here, And so the myth of progress that our generations have lived in, and when you challenge that, these people come back at you, it requires courage. And yet, the way that I like to think about it, because I don't do that, I just have people plant trees, okay? That's it, which is satisfying no matter what your view of the future. But what I think about in terms of when I see people at an event doing that to Michael, and he's got courage, is that what happens is that someone will generally need to hear it once, twice, 3 times, and maybe the 4th time from someone. They'll accept it and then become part of the solution rather than inadvertently part of the continuing problem. But it requires that first, second, and third person to be willing to stand up and say something, even though they're being knocked back, and have the courage because they know that we all need more than once. If it's an uncomfortable or inconvenient truth, we need to hear it a number of times.
Yeah, that's true. The inconvenient truths sometimes make us very uncomfortable.
And lash back, not just uncomfortable. The anger comes right back.
For a long time, too.
Yes.
I occasionally hear from students, and in fact I had a conversation with a former student, not a student of mine, but a colleague of mine just the other day, who said that the stuff I get from students is, you really irritated me. It was really troubling. I mean, you made me angry, and but now I agree with you. So years later.
Well, yes,
and I had
years
this
later,
conversation with a student who had a colleague of mine for a religion class, and he said I kept taking courses from this guy, and I hated it because he kept telling me stuff that I did not believe, and I took additional classes because I was looking for ways to put him down or to answer him, and he said now these years later, I've come around to his way of thinking.
Yes.
So, so if you had somebody an inconvenient truth, that may smart for a while, but it might also generate further thought that will ultimately change their way of thinking. It's a delicate issue. This question of truth and
well, I mean, because you've taught at a Christian college, you've had that experience, I suspect, many times. I mean, when I was a freshman at Evangel College, affiliated with the Assemblies of God, and then when I went to seminary, I sort of was at a place, because I was a double major, philosophy and religious studies, so that when I went to seminary, I was playing that role of, well, you get especially conservative students that come in that have this total literalistic, magical view of these ancient texts. And then you start looking at them as human documents, and it's deeply troubling.
It is, yeah. It's the world that I accepted is not what I thought it was.
Right. Well, with that, one thing I definitely want to, because I also want to hear it again. I think, met you at early '90s at Institute on Religion and Age of Science. Was the Epic of Evolution? I don't know, but it was one of these things. And there was a small group of us sitting around talking, I think 6 of us or so, and I recorded it at the time. And you told the story of when you woke up to the extent of the environmental problem that we were immersed in, was when you were in college. And I remember the word plankton. So could you tell that story again?
Yeah, if I can remember it, it was in the early '60s when Rachel Carson's book Silent Spring came out, and Howard and Eugene Odom were ecologists. There was a new science of ecology emerging, and I think the first graduate courses in ecology were in maybe the late '50s, but I think the early '60s. So ecology as a science was maturing. It was a fledgling science. And I was riding along in a car one day this must have been like '65 or something, by which time ecology courses had dipped down into the undergraduate curriculum. So we were driving along in a car. I was sitting in the back seat next to Larry Stolberg, who was taking an ecology course, and he started talking about the death of the plankton and how we were really in deep shit because of the diminishing plankton, and how everything depended on the plankton, and if they aren't there, we're done for. And that stunned. I was absolutely stunned when I heard that, and so that started me digging around looking for things to read, and of course by the late '60s, Paul Ehrlich was on it, and there were all kinds of. I had a section of ecology books written for the popular audience that filled the bookshelf because I really got nervous about this. The upshot of all that is that I came away from that with a commitment to the idea that we cannot live outside of natural systems, that we are absolutely dependent on natural systems. Of course, my worldview up until that time was that we are absolutely dependent on God. So it was the God language that carried me forward. What I could see in these ecology books that our absolute dependence on nature is what they were talking about when they said we are absolutely dependent on something.
Right. Yeah. Now,
Did Limits to Growth in 1972, when that, I mean, I was in college and I never even heard of that book. When that came out in 1972, did that make a difference to you, or was it just too objectively written?
No, I don't think it was too objectively written. I thought I was welcoming it because by that time I was already there.
Yeah.
And it didn't bring any. It brought new facts to the surface, but it didn't bring any new perspective. And so I was happy to see that, and try to get people to look at it seriously. And yeah, there was an increasing trickle of these messages that were coming, starting in the early '60s, and went on well into the '70s, and then of course
the Reagan Thatcher.
Reagan. I mean, they ruined the world. Really, I mean, they gave us license to accept ourselves from nature.
Ah, yes.
Yeah, this last 25 or 30 year sort of binge.
Yeah.
If we could have followed through with President Jimmy Carter, who's dying now.
Yeah, even earlier. I think in the 30s and 40s. If we'd come out of the Depression, I mean, there were a lot of people that went through the Depression that knew at a sort of visceral level how dependent we were on nature. And that should have been generalized, and we should have learned then that we have to keep our economic game within the boundaries of the natural game.
The language I've started using is ecology is the new theology.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is any theology that doesn't include an ecological worldview is a theology that our grandchildren will condemn us for.
Yeah, and I once, I don't know what the context was, but I once tried to make a big deal out of setting down a new set of 10 Commandments.
Oh, I've been working on that too.
I mean, here we have, what the Old Testament tells us is that here are 613 laws boiled down to 10. And these are the conditions of your existence. You violate these conditions, and you won't exist.
Right.
So these 10 statements, these 10 rules, express the foundation or the conditions by which you exist. Yeah. So I'm thinking, okay, now how would an eco-minded person
I'm working on that right now. That's why I want to see your
come up
list.
with 10 Commandments.
Right.
And that it seems to me is a good exercise too, because something like that. I mean, if we had a set of 10 natural commandments, we would have some guidance in goal setting, which is what we're about.
Right.
And so I don't know why I sort of gave up on that. You can come up with.
Well, you come up with it and then send it to
Well, I will.
Yeah.
Within the next 2 weeks, I'll send you what I've drafted and invite you to perfect it or improve it or.
Well, the Humanist Manifesto comes forward with something like that, with a sort of list of.
Well, Richard Heinberg, in a recent post, he delivered a speech at the Sustainability Conference for Philanthropists in Greece 3 or 4 months ago. It's the best articulation that I've seen of sort of these 7 would be included in any 10 commandments that I can think of.
Do you recall, was there an epiphany or is it just sort of gradual when you really got that human beings could actually alter the climate and melt the ice caps and raise the sea level and alter, do you have a story for how that came into your life?
That came in when the news on the ozone layer was released.
Oh.
It wasn't the carbon dioxide so much; it was the ozone stuff, and that was scary because the whole notion is that these aerosols and the ozone that we put into the environment takes like 23 years to wipe out the ozone layer, and so there's a delayed effect which humans aren't very good at handling, right? We don't take our finger off the button because 23 years from now there might be some loss of ozone. So that was the thing that got me started thinking about the power of climate change. And then, of course, all the stuff about carbon dioxide that came later.
Right. And wasn't the solution the Kyoto Protocol or Montreal, whatever that was? Didn't that happen during the Reagan-Thatcher era? Didn't Reagan and Thatcher actually participate in getting that trounced? I think that was.
Yeah,
That it was so. It was so okay. So all we have to do is get rid of spray deodorants and certain things in our refrigerators, and so it was doable.
Right.
Whereas now we're talking about the very basics of what allows the complexity and the comfort of our civilization. Is we have to stop doing the foundational thing that makes this possible, and that's fossil fuels. Mm-hmm. So nobody wants to do that. Not even some of the environmentalists want to do that.
Well, just think of the chaos that would come. I mean, we're so dependent now on these mistakes.
Well, even that. I mean, that is a cornfield out there that not only requires a tractor, but it requires the natural gas to be used for making the fertilizer that allows that to not even have good soil.
Right. So if we woke up one morning and all of a sudden fossil fuels were outlawed, how many people would lose their jobs? Lots and lots of people would lose their jobs. Right. I mean, the whole economy would be in trouble, and the knock-on effect of that would be, crisis is here. It's happening.
And every single young person would be given something real and important to do because they're able-bodied.
Oh, so it becomes labor-intensive agriculture.
And you can actually see the fruits of what you do. I mean, there's a lot of people who might, young people go into something where they might make a lot of money in law or finance or something, but when it really comes down to, do I feel good about what I do? My gosh, if you're out there, planting trees or raising vegetables or chickens or building a chicken coop, you're doing something that's important.
Well, we're having this conversation. Whenever this ultimately gets put online is another thing. But we're having a conversation. The Pope Francis is just arriving here in the United States.
Hallelujah.
This morning he met with the president. We've not watched anything yet to see what he said. He's meeting with Congress and the United Nations. Is there anything that any of us want to say about that?
I love Pope Francis.
Is that what you want to say about it?
Well, I think that he's exhibiting what I'm calling the evidential reformation, which I think will ultimately transform every religion from basing its authority on ancient text to basing its authority on evidence. And I think that his encyclical he doesn't use the word evidence as modern day scripture, but he's clearly privileging evidence over old men or old books in terms of what's authoritative, and I find that encouraging.
Okay, a little bit of brightness comes there with the new Pope, who's a little bit more enlightened than others.
Well, he doesn't get population yet.
Well, okay, if you're going to get one thing, you're going to get population. That's the big deal. I'm embarrassed about this, but I once wrote a letter to the editor in I think it was the Des Moines newspaper, where the Pope had done something really goofy. I don't know what it was. I can't remember.
You mean the previous Pope?
Yeah, no, two popes.
Two popes back.
And I said, I have this game I play with the Pope all the time. He does something, and then I guess whether he's stupid or evil.
Oh, you said that?
Oh, I got lots of really nasty letters.
You were already retired at that point.
No, this was probably 20 years ago.
Oh my God!
And anyway, I think that if I were this Pope, I don't know how aware he is of these things, but I think he is stuck in a position where truth and comfort are at odds. If he's aware of, which I think he probably is, of the crisis in natural systems and social systems, he should give people a kind of starchy message about the truth. But he's the Pope, and he's all about comfort ye my people, right? I mean, he is
Yes.
he's supposed to make the people comfortable, and
The
so
integral
it's
ecology.
tough. It would
yes.
be tough to be the Pope. I don't think this one is either stupid or evil, but he's in a terrible bind because if there's one action that he could take that would really make a difference, it would be to come out and say, we have overpopulated the planet. I want the Catholic world to listen to me. We have overpopulated the planet. It's time for Planned Parenthood. Let's draw down the birth rate. What would happen? What would be the consequences of that? Would people feel that they've been lied to all these years? Would they feel that the Pope has abandoned the faith? Would they start demanding his resignation? I mean, what would be the
conservatives within the Catholic Church, or some conservatives might take him out?
Yeah.
But he has said we have overconsumed the planet.
Yeah, his encyclicals were.
Yeah.
So it's those two aspects. One is population, and then one is per capita consumption.
Right.
And
Okay. He's saying we're too trout-like.
Trout-like.
Well, this aquarium holds 50 guppies, but no. We're too trout-like. We're too greedy. We're consuming too much.
Right.
But he's also overlooking the fact, or ignoring the fact, by choice probably, that there are too many trout in there, right?
Yeah, but now again, I may have this wrong, but where I'm taking it is that he's also trying to emphasize quality, that he himself is not living in the Pope Palace type thing.
Right.
He's exemplifying a aspiration that is not high on the consumption.
Smaller footprint.
Right.
Yeah.
So even for the guppies in the rest of the world that are not consuming much but are the population, he's saying, don't go this consumption route.
Right.
And that's big.
Yeah.
To take the population as it exists and saying, that's not it. It's there's something more important than consumption.
Okay. But the two drivers are population and consumption. You can't solve the problem by taking on just one of them.
But we both agree this is a predicament to be lived with, not a problem to be solved. That's what I got from Catton.
Right.
And when I see people use that term predicament, I know they've read Catton.
Yeah.
Because it's very distinct. A lot of the things we're talking about are not techno-optimist, you can't solve problems. It's a predicament to be dealt with. And the other thing we love about Catton, that I need Catton for, is that when I get into this sense of how easy it would be to think really bad things about my species, he puts it in the context of giving your aquarium again. If we're trout, we're going to act like trout. If we're guppies, we're going to act like guppies. But the only thing that keeps any species from overshooting is there are built into the system constraints. Mm-hmm. And like right now, the emerald ash borer is on an overshoot process. It hasn't reached this part of Iowa, but it hit Ames last year. And in Michigan, where we've seen it, Indiana, Ohio, every single ash tree, the emerald ash borer, which comes from Eurasia, it's a non-native, invasive, kills them. And at some point, it's going to wipe out all the ash trees here in North America, and it's going to have a die-off.
Yeah, well, we have that
we're
with
no
the chestnut.
different from that. And that's what Catton does. He says, don't go there. Don't go there with beating on your species, because we've got these things and this thing. We've been able to take our overshoot farther than other species can. But as we deal with our predicament, what's important is for us to also utilize the capacity of our species to not bring forth the worst aspects of our human nature, but to cultivate the best.
By setting goals that will help us to deal with the predicament.
Yeah, I think that's a huge.
I don't know where this is going to take us, but I was particularly drawn to a comment that I came across in this reading. Okay, this is about looking ahead at this fairly dismal future. And,
Which chapter is this?
This is in the chapter on moral decay.
Okay.
An age of decadence inevitably follows. Frivolity, aestheticism, hedonism, cynicism, pessimism, narcissism, consumerism, materialism, nihilism, fatalism, fanaticism, and other negative attributes, attitudes, and behaviors suffuse the population. Politics is increasingly corrupt, life increasingly unjust. A cabal of insiders accrues great wealth and power at the expense of the citizens, fostering a fatal opposition of interest between haves and have-nots. Mental and physical illness proliferates. The majority lives for bread and circuses, worships celebrities instead of divinities, takes its bearing from below rather than above, throws off social and moral restraints, shirks duties but insists on entitlements, and so forth. The society's original vigor, virtue, and morale have been entirely effaced. Rotten to the core, the society awaits collapse, with only the date remaining to be determined. I think that's roughly where we are.
Yeah, no, we completely agree. Yeah.
So the question is then, I mean, there are lots of questions, obviously, but one of the questions is, how do we, if this is the case, if we're here, how do we go forward? How do we engage young people? How do we negotiate that fine line between truth and comfort, so that we can enable people to endure this predicament? How can we clear the way toward a post-apocalyptic future that will help us to rebuild? Of course, we're gone, but will help our descendants to rebuild a just and sustainable world.
Well, I think we all do it differently. I mean, what I know that I feel compelled to do is give people the big picture so that it allows them to sort of make sense and interpret this stuff other than, some dysfunctional or disempowering ways. And love something, learn something, let go of something, carry something forward. So sort of that practical, learn to grow some food, learn some skills that if the shit hits the fan in the coming months or years, which I suspect it will, economically, that you are not just sort of for the first time thinking about how you're going to survive and be of support to your community, but you've given that some thought prior to shit hitting the fan.
Yeah, it's a great challenge, but it is ultimately, I think, a challenge of storytelling. We are storytellers, and we survive because we have some sense of who we are and where we belong, and all of this comes from our stories, and our stories guide us in setting goals. Trouble is, we've had the wrong stories. The stories we've been telling have gotten us into serious difficulty, which will bring lots of misery in the next generation or two. So what we need to do is to tell a more realistic story, and to help people find the hope in that story, and get on with it, knowing that it's going to be, we've got some rough patches ahead of us. I mean, really rough patches.
Yeah. Amen. Well, that's exactly what I meant by the big picture, but I love the way you just articulated that.
Well, I work at a much more practical, little action level. And the story that motivates me is a story that actually I didn't learn about until the 1980s. And I saw it at the time, and it moved me at the time, but now it's integral to me. And that is, did you ever see the 1984 video won the Best Animation Academy Awards at pre-digital times, called The Man Who Planted Trees, narrated by Christopher Plummer? A French writer had written a very short story that was apocryphal. It sounds like it was about a real person. And it's just a beautiful, you can find it on YouTube. I show it to wherever I go, and it's all about a man who was just he was just a shepherd going about his life, and he started planting oak trees in portions of France where the mountains had been devastated by people cutting all the trees for wood and for making charcoal for manufacturing steel for the wars, basically. And he spent his whole last 50, 60 years of his life, one by one, planting acorns, planting oak trees. And he died this wonderful life. And meanwhile, all these people who didn't know he had done anything were able to repopulate and live happily back in the mountains because the trees were back and the water was running again. And so for me, that's the myth. And so what I do is I take the understanding that the forest researchers have of how fast, how far, and by each species, the trees around us here will have to move north. Mm-hmm. And very few of them can be moved north on their own. The black walnuts you have here absolutely need help. So does the white pine. What else do we have here? Red oaks. Oh, these paper birch, they're going to be out of here.
They can't do it fast enough.
They can't do it fast enough. And Engelmann spruce, 2030. Engelmann spruce, 2060. 2090. 30-year increments, that's a general maturation time for one generation of trees. Not a heck of a lot of natural selection can go on in that time. I took this picture last summer coming through Wolf Creek Pass. Three years earlier, when I'd gone through here, 12,000 feet on the highway, southern Colorado, all green. Bark beetles come in suddenly. Native beetles killing off things, you know it's climate. And it has to happen this century.
Assisted migration.
It's called assisted migration. And so I try to accomplish two things with this. I don't argue about climate change. I just present the maps that the forest researchers have drawn of how that habitat is moving north through the century. And I give people an opportunity to be involved in moving, in planting trees, so that you don't have this period of, oh, we're doomed. But it's like, yes, we're doomed. Here, do this.
Great example of goal setting in the context of declining natural systems. That's right. Just exactly what we have to do. Sit down and talk about our goals.
I was reminded of the story with Thomas Berry and sleeping outside under his great red oak tree, 500-year-old oak tree, when you were telling me about this that you had in your living room. So say something about this.
Well, this is one of the ancestral farms of my family in Norway. It was the Overland family, and on that Overland farm in Norway, there stands the oldest tree in all of Norway. It's an 800-year-old oak tree, and it's dying. There's only a couple of branches that bear leaves. Most of it is dead, and chunks are falling off. And I took this chunk, put it in my suitcase, and brought it back to the States. And now it sits in this ancestral cabin, along with some other artifacts to remind me that that life is old, and we ought to value trees, and it's a link to my past, and so it's very valuable to me. But it's just a hunk of wood.
And I got a bag at one of the times that I was there. I must have gotten 150 acorns from Thomas Berry's tree.
You don't want the acorns. You want the scions, so that you can graft it. I mean, the acorn will give you nothing. But if you want a clone of the tree, you have to have a scion, and it's gone. So it's too late.
Right.
Yeah, it's
too late for some things, isn't it?
Too late for some things. Yes. Yeah. Well, I'd say that's a very appropriate symbol for the 4 points you mentioned. Love something, learn something. You've learned about your own heritage of great, 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 great grandparents back in Norway. Let something go? No, but carry something forward. I mean, you're going to pass this on with the story about this ancient oak to someone in your family who will then go on for greats.
Yeah, somebody will check it out at some point if they don't know what it is. It's
Right,
just a little
exactly.
chunk of wood, but if we keep telling a story about
Exactly.
it won't get chucked out.
Exactly. If we keep telling the story.
But here you are in northeast Iowa. You're about 3 miles away from a very interesting institution called Seed Savers International.
All right.
Have you heard of it?
Yes.
The story is that a young couple living in California uh, moved to Iowa because the young woman's grandfather was dying just south of Detroit. And so they came for the summer to live with him as he pulled out. And before he died, he made them promise that they would keep alive these seeds that he had brought from Czechoslovakia. Tomato seeds and beans, and these are heritage. These we've grown in our family for centuries or generations, and please keep these seeds going. They were moved by that. They committed themselves to doing that. And then they started to gather seeds from other neighbors around there, some Czechs and some Germans, and so they started collecting more and more and more seeds, and they were committed to growing these out and keeping them alive. Well, one thing led to another, and they formed something called Seed Savers, and they bought a little plot of land where they planned to grow these things out. And then they got a MacArthur Award, and that gave them a large puddle of money that they used to enlarge this farm and do some building and really establish themselves. And that's a very, very serious going operation. It's 3 miles from here.
Yes.
You have to go there today.
We're going to go to see Seed Savers.
Yeah, let's go.
Okay.